So my name is Tammy Banks. I am the founder and director of Taye Training. We've recently rebranded to Transform Your Training. And we're the place to come for facilitators who want to be the very best trainers or to book brilliant training. And today we're talking about why you should care about accessible and inclusive training. I've got a few people here helping me today. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Becky Dawson. If you can give a wave, Becky, to everybody, that's great. And Becky's put her introduction in the chat for you as well. She's been delivering for Taye for, gosh, what, 4 or 5 years now, Becky? Yeah, 4 years, brilliant, thank you. We've also got the brilliant Noel Moran, so I've seen his details in the chat as well. So Noel's been delivering with Taye for the last couple of years as well. And like Becky, is an award-winning facilitator. And then we've got the wonderful Ezra from Arlo, who actually onboarded Taye to Arlo when we started using Arlo's training management system. This is a partnership webinar between Taye and Arlo. I'm going to hand over to Ezra to tell you a little bit about Arlo, but we've shortened the introductions considerably. So if any of you were here last week, please bear with us for the next 2 or 3 minutes, but we'll be as quick as we can so we can get into some of the content. Sorry, Ezra, just to cut in and say, and here's what we're going to aim to cover in this next kind of 55 minutes.
Hi everyone. I've dropped my details in the chat, and some of you might have seen me in the first part one series. But thank you all for jumping on. As Tammy said, we're partnering with Transform Your Training to deliver this 3-part series around delivering the very best training you can possibly. We are a training management solution for training providers, built by trainers for training organizations. I won't speak too much about it, because if you're on part one, you would have heard the full details. But yeah, as Tammy mentioned, I've worked with her over the years and seen just the power of I guess technology really help her in growing her business, but also focusing on what she really wants to focus on, which is actually delivering the training and not those administrative mundane processes. So that's where we can help out. And if anyone needs any help, I'll be sitting in the background as a moderator. So any questions about Arlo or about training, just drop it in the comments there, and myself and my colleague Bianca will be there to respond to those. So thanks for that, Tammy, and over back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ezra. Yeah, and really good reminder there, Ezra. I meant to say, please, we're going to be using the chat box throughout this session. So please do kind of type away in there and get as involved as you're happy to do. If you've got any specific questions to anyone on the panel, whether it's to do with training or training management systems, please use the Q&A and we can answer through there as well. And it just makes it a little bit easier for you to track questions and comments within the chat as well. I am going to be involving Becky and Noel as facilitators throughout this session. They do, as I said, they deliver for us at Transform Your Training. And so they have some brilliant examples to share when we talk about kind of inclusive and accessible training. We have about 70 facilitators now. And since we started working with Ezra at Arlo, we've kind of grown 10 times. And just like Arlo said, like Ezra said, we couldn't really have done that without putting in place systems in the background to do all of the things around kind of certificates and feedback surveys and communicating and gosh, all of that allocating to facilitators and things like that. So that's who we are, and that's how we use Arlo to help us focus on what we believe is really important, which is the very best quality values-led training. Arlo have asked us to do this webinar because we are championing a mission that is the power of quality training. We absolutely believe that for facilitators, it is your responsibility to deliver the best training you can possibly deliver. And we believe that anybody attending or booking training deserves to attend the very best training. And within that, the equitable inclusivity and accessibility is so important because we want to meet everybody's learning needs when we're delivering training. So one of the things that I do is kind of go around kind of telling people people that there's no excuse for boring and inspiring training, and trying to kind of change that narrative around tick box training. And in the middle here, you'll see our Royal Accolade award-winning methodology, which is what we follow at Transform Your Training. It's the foundations of our book and our Train the Trainer qualification as well. So let's get straight into the content then. Let's move forward in this and get you guys involved a little bit. Some of you will already have used Slido. You'll know exactly what it is. Some of you won't have. What I would like you to do is either scan the QR code, which should now be on your screen, hopefully, or you can join at slido.com and you put in hashtag 9789579. And then when you do that, you will be given the option to type your answers. What does accessible and inclusive mean? So I'll just give you a moment to do that, and I will share the Slido with you so that we can see what everybody is posting up there as well. So do let us know if you have any problems with that. Ah, brilliant. I can see things just starting coming in. Brilliant. Look at this. Don't you love it when technology works? Do you know? So at the moment, we've got just a couple of comments on there. So we've got meeting people's needs. Yeah, fair and considerate. Everyone can use it. Yeah. Ah, I love this one. Look, for all people can equally have access to learning. Any necessary adaptations made individually, no one size fits all. That is so important, because sometimes we take that word equality, don't we? And then we think that that's about kind of just treating everybody equally, but actually it's not about treating everybody equally. It's about being equitable and equal in that playing field, which I can see on there as well. Yeah. And if you haven't used Slido before, just to know, if something is written more than once, it grows in Slido. So you can see here that for everyone is right in the middle here. And it's a little bit bigger than the other comments, and that's because more than one person has put for everyone. So we'll just give it another 30 seconds or so for people to kind of log on and join that. I think we've got 16 of you, 17 of you on there at the moment. So we've got less than half of you that have managed to access it. So if you are struggling in any way, please reach out to Becky or Noel and they can help you. Or just pop your comment in the chat and we'll see it there as well. So just to carry on with some of these, respect, yeah. Meeting people's needs, universal, fairness, flexible for individuals, available for everyone, yeah, equity, easy to find, making things easy, understanding intersectionality. That is a brilliant one. I'd love, whoever's written that one, I would absolutely love if you would pop in the chat box just kind of a definition, so to speak, of intersectionality, because I think for some people that may be kind of a new concept, but it's where people have multiple differences, disabilities, or protected characteristics or needs, and literally the way that they overlap or impact each other. But yeah, understanding intersectionality, fantastic, brilliant. Excuse me, barriers removed, yeah, fantastic, brilliant. Thank you so much. What's brilliant here is, you know, whenever you're doing these, and you guys will know because you're facilitators too, that you never know what you're going to get. So you've got this title up there and you're thinking, oh gosh, I really hope people have kind of this level of understanding or respond in this way, but you never quite know what you're going to get because it is live like this. So it's brilliant to see kind of all of this feedback. Yeah, equitable, not equal is brilliant. Yeah, and I really like this one as well. I think this is a really quite empowering one, accommodating. Do you know, because actually sometimes we can assume we know what somebody needs, and we really might not. And so actually accommodating them and what works for them. And yeah, that welcoming uniqueness, that is brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So yeah, so this is, for us, this is what accessible and inclusive means. And when I'm talking about accessible and inclusive from a perspective of transform your training, we've been running about 8 years now. Started off with just two of us, and now there's 70 of us. And in that time, we've predominantly been delivering to frontline organisations like charities, police, criminal justice, probation, social care, etc. And we do deliver some really, really complex subjects. So I know that people in the chat have said kind of that some of them are delivering safeguarding training, some of them suicide prevention training, etc. They're the type of sessions that we deliver. And it's really important for us. And we created our methodology around being values led in the way that we deliver training. And it is absolutely the golden thread that goes through everything that we do. And part of being values led is really kind of considering about how do we provide equitable training? How do we ensure that anybody who is attending our training has an equal opportunity to not only engage but also to understand and also to retain that information as well. And I believe fundamentally that it is a responsibility of the facilitator to be the very best that they can be and to understand and to learn about accessibility and inclusivity, and make adaptations in advance where they possibly can. That being said, I really recognise the limitations that an individual delivering training may have. And that might be your knowledge, that might be your understanding, that might be tech ability, but whatever the limitations are, the one limitation all of us always have is that we're not that person with the difference or the disability or the need. We're not that person. So we can't provide everything for everybody all of the time. And also sometimes people's needs might actually contradict each other in a variety of different ways. And as facilitators, we have to kind of manage that as well. So from an accessible and inclusive perspective, it's certainly a balance. It's about us knowing what we can know, keeping up to date as much as we can possibly keep up to date, and considering and learning at a staged approach, our own CPD as trainers as well. It's about us doing that and informing ourselves, but it's also really keenly about the way that we communicate with our delegates in advance of the training session, during the training session, and also post the training session as well, and how we set kind of the scene for the delegates and how we provide kind of that safe space for them to be able to say, actually, this is what will make my learning experience richer, or this is what will help me be able to engage or retain this information more effectively. Quite often when we talk about accessible and inclusive, people kind of immediately jump to the end of the spectrum with regards to disabilities. One of the things that I talk about regularly is that absolutely we have, without a doubt, responsibilities and legal responsibilities from a consideration of disability perspective. But when we're talking about accessible and inclusive, we're talking about everybody all of the time. We all have differences, sometimes differences day to day, depending on what's going on in our lives and what's happening and such like. So when we're going through this session and I'm talking about accessible and inclusive, I'm talking about kind of everybody all of the time. But of course, there is additional elements of this that we'll talk about that are really quite specific as well, with regards to considering a variety of differences and the way that you engage and present. The other thing to say is that predominantly we're talking here about online instructor-led training. So a bit like this, however, not webinar style, with breakout rooms, with more interaction and such like, because it's a training course. We may touch on some examples from face-to-face, but predominantly these sessions, what people asked Arlo for and what they asked Transforming Training for was things more connected to kind of online delivery, because there's a lot more of that happening now. When we first started delivering online, unsurprisingly, it was back in COVID times, the expectations around inclusivity and accessibility weren't really that high, because what we were all doing is just trying to work out actually how to how to navigate online, you know, how to get people in, and we were trying very much to emulate face-to-face training. We're 4 years on now, and times have moved on quite significantly from that. And we recognise now that actually 80% of what was face-to-face training is now live online training. And so the expectations, rightly so, are that live online training is as accessible and inclusive as face-to-face training. So this probably isn't new to you, do you know, but I think it's really important that we do kind of stop a moment and connect accessibility and inclusivity into learning styles. Um, you'll see here kind of visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and reflective. And just to kind of say what's on the screen here, in case this is new for you, visual learners understand best through images, diagrams, and written instructions. Auditory learners prefer listening to explanations, having discussions, or verbal instructions. Kinesthetic learners learn by doing, using hands-on activities or physical movement, and reflective learners need time to think, process, and analyze information. So before I kind of talk any more about that, I'm just going to ask Bianca, who's kindly in the background, to just launch a poll so we can just have a look, just consider yourself and just click the poll and tell us what type of learner you think you are. So we'll just give a minute for that. We'll just give it 10 more seconds, and then Bianca, I'll ask you to share the results if that's okay. Whenever you're ready, Bianca, that'd be great. It's like magic, do you know? It's like, do you know when you've got an Alexa and you can just go da 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 da? Ah, look at this. Okay, fantastic. So you can all see the results up here. And it's interesting because I was talking to Ezra and Bianca, who's helping with the tech in the background from Arlo, just before this session. And Bianca said to me, "Oh, what's your learning style?" And I said, "Well, predominantly it's kinesthetic. You know, I prefer hands-on experiences. I learn by doing, but actually it's really a mix of all of them, depending on the circumstance and depending on the type of information, depending on the situation and the learning." And I said to her, what I'm expecting from the poll is that actually those two ones are heavier, and the mix of all of these is kind of the heaviest. So again, it's fantastic to see that, and I think that really highlights quite clearly that if we've got what 44 people here at the moment, and if half of you have said that actually predominantly you're a mix of all of these, I think it's really key to kind of remember that will be usually very, very similar for delegates as well. And so actually when you're delivering training and when you want it to be kind of accessible and inclusive for people, as a facilitator, when you're developing your training and then you're delivering your training, it's really important that you manage to meet all of these different learning styles. And there's a whole kind of host of different ways to do that. So you'll have already known kind of the Slido that I'm using and the chat box that I'm using. I'm trying to get you guys and the poll that we're using to do things. The reason Arlo sends the recording afterwards is because if you're a reflective learner and you want to go back through it and things like that, you've got the recording. The PowerPoint is here in case you're a visual learner. Do you know, if you're an auditory learner and you're not looking at the screen but you're listening and processing, that's why I'm talking so much, and that's why I read out some of the things that are on the slide. So as a facilitator for accessible and inclusive learning, learning styles is really fundamental. And when we're developing the training and delivering the training, it's really important that we don't do what facilitators quite often do, is naturally gravitate towards actually just providing activities that meet their learning style, because that's where we're most comfortable. So actually challenging ourselves around that is really useful. I'm going to ask either Becky or Noel, so whichever one of you kind of wants to unmute, just to kind of give an example of actually activities and things that you use to meet a variety of learning styles in your training. Can see Becky unmuting, so thank you, Becky.
I was looking at Noel first, but yes. So I think I've learned a huge amount about this over the last few years. One of the things for reflective learners is giving them the time with case studies. I think that's probably one of the most powerful activities I use, but also getting them to work with other people in that space. So giving them an opportunity to take everything they've learned during the session, give them some case studies, put them into groups so that they can then work together. And actually you can make that visual and auditory as well, in terms of the way they're discussing the things and thinking about the different people's points of view, and giving them the visual of the case studies. I did have one case not that long ago, actually, where someone came onto my course and really struggled with reading resources. They needed blue paper, basically. And so I desperately, in the background, took some of my things and copied and pasted it onto something blue for them so they could read it. So it's things like that as well. But I think case studies is probably one of the ones that meets most of the learning needs in lots of different ways if you put people in groups doing them. But I think also something that we do at Taye is accelerated learning, is to give people things to do while they're learning, and that has had the biggest impact both on my face. Oh, sorry, I didn't. Both on my face,
carry on.
on my face, on my face-to-face work and online, is saying to people, actually, if you've got a pen and pencil, doodle away. You know, I was a secondary school teacher for over 20 years, and I've spent all of my time telling people to stop doodling, stop fiddling, sit quietly. But actually, what we know now is that that's what people should be doing. And so particularly with my face-to-face training, people love the fact that they've got fiddle toys, they've got colouring. Neurodivergent learners really commonly say that that's one of the best things about training, and I tend to get comments on those things.
Awesome. That was like the perfect segue into accelerated learning. So I'm super pleased about that, Becky. Thank you very much. Yeah, and exactly what Becky said there for us, like one of the things that when we go through the train the trainer sometime, and we take facilitators for it, sometimes we're kind of unteaching them exactly what Becky's just been explaining, you know, all the way through their life, whether it's their childhood or whether it's through their career. The people have been told, you know, you're not concentrating if you're doing something else at the same time. I personally have ADHD. If I'm not doing 5 things at the same time, then I'm not concentrating, you know. And when I do kind of the quizzes and the tests and things like that, or people ask me questions and things, and I've got the answers and I can engage with them, people are like, oh, okay. So even though it looked like you were doing this, doing that, doing the other, you were still switched on. And I need multiple stimulations to be able to be switched on. And that's where accelerated learning is just fantastic. Because if you think back to kind of what we were saying about the learning styles, this is a really quick win for when you are kind of just doing the auditory stuff, or when you are kind of being more reflective and things, because you're putting the power in the delegates' hands, and you're saying to them, you know, you've got 5 senses. Everybody has a dominant sense that helps to keep them alert, awake, and retain information. Do you know, I like verbally chatting away, but if I can't chat away, because obviously there's many a situation that I can't, then actually I just like sucking a sweet or fiddling with like a fiddle toy or something like that. So we always say to our online learners right at the beginning, in our pre-course information, we tell them 2 lines about accelerated learning, and we give them some examples and say, do you know, if you want to do some knitting, if you want to have your lunch, do you know, if you want to do some doodling or get your kids Lego out or anything like that, please feel free to do that. So alongside kind of swapping up and changing the activities all of the time, really important for us to also put the responsibility in the delegates' hands. We take along accelerated learning kits, like Becky's just explained, for face-to-face training, but for online learning, do you know, it is about giving them that responsibility for their own learning. I'm regularly saying to people, you're only going to get out of this what you put into this. And if you were here last week, or if you weren't here last week, I guess I should say, we kind of touched on the importance of pre-course information being sent out. That pre-course information should have details of accelerated learning from our perspective, and also about accessibility and inclusivity as well. And ideally, where at all possible, contact details where they can contact you in advance of the session. Because like with Becky and that blue paper, if she'd known that in advance, she could have prepped that. We quite often send presentations to people in advance, kind of on with a different font and things like that. And also, really importantly, and this is something that honestly I didn't know, and we had an amazing person join our administration team probably about 5.5, 6 years ago now. And she kind of proofs all of our presentations, our PowerPoint training presentations. And so she has a lot of those to do. And she came to me one day and said, these are all great, but you haven't used the right accessibility tools. And I was like, what do you mean? And it's things like on PowerPoint, if you're putting a header, like you can see up here, quick win, accelerated learning, if you click header on PowerPoint and you put that in, when you then send that PowerPoint to somebody, their e-reader will tell them that that is a header. Whereas if you just put a text box and you just put information in it, for instance, then when the e-reader reads it, it doesn't differentiate from the rest of the information. So it's things like that that can make a really huge difference. And although, yes, I'll be kind of dropping little bits like that throughout today's session, and Becky and Noel will also share parts, we haven't got time in an hour to go through all of that. But what we will be doing is sharing with you a really fantastic 36-page guide written by facilitators at Transform Your Training that actually step by step talks you through with checklists as well, kind of how to be accessible and inclusive pre-course, during course, and post-course as well. And we created that because when we searched online for this stuff, we could find a little bit about if somebody has dyslexia, a little bit about if somebody has ADHD, a little bit about if somebody has visual impairment, but we couldn't find anything for facilitators that actually kind of connected it all together and talked about it from a facilitation perspective. So we'll share that at the end and give you access to that as well. So if there are things as we're going through this session, you're thinking, I'm not sure that they've touched on that, that guide is brilliant and kind of contextualizes things within the UK legislation, but is still very relevant and very comparable. And then kind of goes into very much actually as a facilitator, what you can do. And remember, you can't do everything all of the time, do you know? So it is about actually just consciously doing our best as well. So I'm going to move on from this accelerated learning, and I'm so that I can get you guys a little bit more active as well. And we're going to, in a moment, Ezra's going to magically kind of open up the whiteboard, and we're going to ask you to have a think about a few different things. And we want you to think about actually ways to meet a variety of learning styles online. And when the whiteboard opens up, what you'll see kind of those learning styles at the top. And I just want you to put any ideas, anything that you do under those headings so that we can have a little bit of a talk through that. Feel free to also kind of put in the chat box why you do those things. And Ezra, Becky and Noel will kind of copy those over to the whiteboard for you. And before we go on to that, you know, I've put on here around kind of that passive, that interactive and that blended learning. I've done that really specifically because of the connection to the poll at the beginning. Learning styles has had kind of, there's a lot of psychological theory behind it, a lot of evidence behind learning styles. But also more recently, there's been questions about the different types of learning styles and how valid are they and things like that. We don't get into kind of the devil of the detail within that. What we kind of lean into is what our delegates need. And if you looked at kind of that last slide that I had up, you know, actually it's that blended learning that really engages people and enables them to retain up to 90% of that information. I think the key thing to say is that just that passive learning, Do you know, that old school style, Becky, maybe a bit about like you were talking about, do you know, where you're saying don't get engaged, don't do this, don't do that, just listen. That doesn't work. And it still frustrates me to this day that my daughter, who's at uni, she's only in her first year, she's still coming home saying, do you know, our lecturers want us to sit there, look at them, write notes, and that is it. And that's not how she learns. So it really frustrates me. But what I would like to say, and why you guys are all here, is because we know that actually we need to do a bit more than that. So fun. Sorry, I just saw Zelfa's answer, and that has just made me laugh out loud, Zelfa, because I think you were describing my life there, with regards to kind of all of your multitasking and the different things that you do at the same time. So brilliant. So we have the whiteboard up on here now. What I would like then is in the webinar chat, I have no doubt you guys are all facilitators. Many of you will be absolutely phenomenal facilitators, potentially all of you. Do you know, anything that is shared today, we're going to share amongst everybody attending. So do put into the chat, do you know, what do you do to meet the needs of visual learners? What do you do to meet the needs of auditory learners or kinesthetic or reflective learners? So just add that into the chat, and then hopefully we'll move it over to the whiteboard, but I will kind of keep talking through the chat as well as that comes up. Fantastic. Yes, Sapna, we will send that guide across to you, no problem. Oh yeah, Zelfa, being diagnosed was revolutionary for me. It's I really didn't realize that my brain worked quite differently to a lot of other people's. So yeah. Yeah, Sarah, that's brilliant. So visual learnings, where possible, we limit words on the slide to a max of 15 and rely on visual clues for learning. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, PowerPoint, Sketch, wow. Would you mind, Chris, just putting in the comments what Sketch wow is? I've not heard of that. Videos, yeah. Fantastic. Auditory, yeah, videos, recordings. Created a workbook and then deliver it live, and then people can do the group activities and embed and conversation to embed in the theory and learning. Yeah, we quite often do that as well, Sapna, you know, have workbooks for people, because quite often you can put a lot of the information that's in the presentation, particularly kind of the facilitator notes, you can put into a workbook for people to kind of keep going back to and referring to and such like as well. Yeah, so Nikki says visual. We deliver most of our courses to deaf people with BSL as a visual language and with English not being their first language. So yeah, it's really important that we include visual pictures, videos, animations. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Nikki. And I think as well, Nikki, you'll kind of appreciate what I said earlier about actually PowerPoint has a lot of different mechanisms and capabilities that I wasn't aware of. And actually, you can get PowerPoint now. If you've got the newest version, you can get PowerPoint to do an accessibility check for you. And so things like what I just said about using the right heading and using the text in the right way and things like that, even the right colours for people with dyslexia, the right fonts, how much information is on a slide. You can actually click a button in PowerPoint that's called accessibility, and it will do an accessible check for you, and it will give you kind of top tips on the right hand side. And what's really great about the newest version is that, a little bit like if you make tracked changes to a document, you can also, for a lot of the things now, just click accept change and it will change it for you. And I just think that is really, really powerful. The same as well, Sapna, when you're creating a workbook, if you create a workbook in Word, it's the same things with regards to the e-readers and such like as well. So there's an accessibility check in there that will help you and say, actually, if you make that title that you've bolded into an actual formal heading, that'll be read differently by the e-reader and such like. Yeah, and Chris, for the videos, brilliant. And just wherever possible, kind of have those captions on those videos. Also transcripts to the videos as well. Do you know, quite often we will send transcripts to people. And I think when we're talking from my perspective about accessible and inclusive training, it's also about keeping things safe for people as well. So giving people trigger warnings before videos, or sending the transcripts in advance for people, or post the video as well, depending on what their needs are. Really powerful. Recording, voice recordings and music, do you know, can make such a difference there as well. Yeah, and animations to support discussion, fantastic. Oh, brilliant. Look, 23 messages all came through at the exact same time for me at that point. So yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, frequent breaks. Thank you, Sky. Yeah, frequent breaks for exercises. Yeah, this is so key, and really possible online as well. Do you know, and getting people to stand up and move around, or to go and fetch something. But you know, just bear in mind when you're doing this to have other options for people as well, because again, you might not know about some of their capabilities with regards to movement and such like. One of the things that we've found at Tay is that although people will contact us about their accessibility needs, they assume they're just going to be sat in front of a computer if it's online, and so they might not tell us about their physical accessibility needs, and so that's quite a key one as well. And if you came along last week and you heard, I think it might have been Noel saying about letting the delegates in a few minutes before the training session to check their tech and encourage them to have their cameras on and things. The other thing that you can do at that point is ask them and say, do you know, is there anything that I can do to support your learning? Do you know, do you have any accessibility needs? Or how do you pronounce your name? That's another great one for inclusivity. Do you know, asking them how to pronounce a name, or whether they would like their pronouns different, etc. And like I said, all of this is in the guide as well. So don't think you have to remember all this, because I know there's quite a few things that I'm kind of saying, but all of this is in the guide, and a checklist is in the guide as well. So it's broken down to make it really simple as well. Yeah, so yeah, kinesthetic, try and see what happens. Linda, that's a great one. Encourage people not to get tied up in producing something that's perfect. Yeah, that's a really, really good one. And that creativity around that. Do you know, back in the day, when I remember doing face-to-face training and being given some flip chart, a load of pens, some Play-Doh, loads of different things, and then just being asked to kind of create something that represents how I might be a leader, for instance, or do you know, how I might respond in a certain situation. We can still do that online. Do you know, we can give people that time to go and do it, to grab something from in the house that represents it, or to do something creative online with using the different tech that is available as well. I think one of the important things to say about the tech, though, is always have a backup plan, because if you're at the last webinar and this webinar, do you know, there's always kind of different kind of tech difficulties and things. And so if the Slido wasn't going to work, I'd have asked you to put it in the chat. Do you know, if the chat was disabled for some reason, I would have taken people, I would have unmuted people as they put their hand up. Do you know, just always have a backup plan. Sometimes I literally will get people, if they want to write it down on paper and kind of hold it up. So I think it's about being able to be confident enough to be flexible and to ask the questions, but to set the right tone before the training as well. Nikki says, didn't know this. This is great. Thanks. But I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. But I'm going to say thank you. It might be somebody's comment, or it might have been one of the few different things that I've kind of said. So yeah, thank you for that. Brilliant. So I'm going to come to Noel now, if that's okay, Noel. And because I know that you work really hard, because you do wellbeing training, don't you, and trauma-informed training. So on your online sessions, you work really hard to kind of involve everybody and even get them meditating and things. So can you just talk us through, just for a couple of minutes, how you make your sessions as accessible as possible for people?
Hi everyone first. Yeah, I like to make my sessions as interactive as I possibly can, and just having that just that little mixture of the learning and then maybe doing something practical. So whether it's getting them doing some kind of movement or whether it's doing some kind of meditations or something like that, depending on the well-being session itself. But also what I like to do when I am doing movement, it's not just them copying me. It's about kind of doing the learning as well whilst we're doing that and explaining the benefits. And so they're not only hearing and listening to what I'm saying, they're also feeling it practically kind of there on the spot itself. But as you mentioned, trauma informed, like that's something that's, as you know, that's really important to me. And I guess that's from yourself, Tammy, and just getting me to recognize my own kind of traumas within my life, which I'm not going to go into right now. Um, but I think just being trauma informed to ourselves first and getting the delegates to have a real think about that because we put a lot of emphasis on being trauma informed to the people that we're working with or the people within our care, but not a lot of people tend to kind of just take care of themselves. And I think that gives people a lot of time to reflect. And once they get it and it connects with them, then they open up to whatever learning it is that we're going to go throughout the day.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Noel. I think one of the things that I just want to carry on from what you just said there, and actually thank you for kind of bringing it in, is that when we are talking about accessible and inclusive training, it is also about considering yourself as a facilitator. So within Transform Your Training, our facilitators, within the world, to be fair, but we all have differences, different needs, a whole variety of kind of things that work for us and people with different disabilities and languages and such like. And so it's also about considering what you need. I know that we've had conversations with facilitators about actually when breaks are put into sessions at certain points because actually they need those breaks for whatever reason, and for different sessions to be delivered in different ways. So we do a lot of practice learning, which people kind of sometimes recoil back from because used to be known as role play. But you know, we do a lot of that, and quite often we'll do that based on what the facilitator's needs are when we're designing that as well, to ensure that the facilitator has everything that they need to be able to deliver that session. And depending on what the subject is, kind of that stuff around that safe space and such like as well is really, really important.
And I just add to that, Tammy, just around the safe spaces and just with breaks as well, because what we always do anyway, kind of within Transform Your Training, is creating that safe space at the beginning and kind of just letting the delegates know that the session does belong to them. And especially if it's a real emotive subject that we're delivering, it's giving them the option is to call a break whenever they want to break. Even though we have that kind of set breaks, but if you want 5 minutes, it's short session, you just call 5 minutes and we can stop and we can pause, which I've got some amazing feedback with delegates doing that as well.
Yeah, and I think it is important because when we're talking about inclusive training, you know, for training to be inclusive of everybody, it is about creating that safe space that meets their needs. I think sometimes, particularly when we're trying to kind of cram everything into an hour session, you know, this is like a key part of our train the trainer course, and goes over multiple kind of sessions with a variety of different learning elements and such like, and we're trying to cram it all in here, so it can potentially seem quite overwhelming. You know, how can I make sure that I'm being inclusive? How can I make sure that I'm having a safe space? How can I make sure that I'm meeting all of these different kind of needs, whether it's of people kind of who are neurodiverse or different protected characteristics, etc. Really can seem like this big thing. And as a facilitator, some of the things I can honestly say to you, you will already be doing naturally. You just won't necessarily be knowing the impact that you're making. Other things, what I would say is when you get the guide, and I'll show you it in a moment. Do you know, as you work through it, do you know, if you aren't doing 80% of it and you look at the guide and then you implement some things and you assess again and there's a 60% gap, that's a 20% positive increase. Do you know, we can't be everything or do everything all of the time, but we do have a responsibility to do our very best within this kind of situation. I have to say, Zelfa, this isn't something that I do, but I may steal it from you if that's okay, because what we were saying is that everybody's sharing their top tips here. Zelfa's put brain breaks, tongue twisters, or random questions like, what's your favourite cake? Just to give everybody a break from kind of that intense listening. I absolutely love that. So what I'm going to say now is I would like to know what everybody's favourite cake is. Okay, so please put in the chat box what your favourite cake is. And then I'm going to take us over and talk a little bit through kind of the guide so you can see where you can access other information as well, and where we can go into a little bit more deep. Oh, wow, look at all these. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by cake now. Zephyr, I think I need your guidance on how not to get distracted by cake. Oh, Terry, you're after my heart. Coconut. Yeah. Okay, right, sorry. I will go back to the presentation. Ezra, if you wouldn't mind just stopping sharing for me, that would be awesome. Fantastic, thank you. And what I just want to do is kind of just, I guess, demystify this a little bit and kind of touch on the fact that, right from the beginning, I said, we won't be able to cover everything in this. And so, yes, I've been kind of, as you guys have been interacting, I've been giving kind of little different things that we do. I'll come back to Becky and Noel and just see if they want to add anything after we've gone through this guide, just around kind of that inclusivity or that accessibility. But we can't, there's no way we can go for everything, and we certainly can't show you or teach you how to do everything. That's literally what a Train the Trainer course does. But hopefully we've given you enough to go, oh, I'm going to go and have a look at that thing on PowerPoint, or oh, I'm going to change the way that I do this now, etc. Last week you were sent a free guide, sorry, not a free guide, you were sent an example of our pre-course instructions. That is fundamental and connects into this as well. So do have a look at those. But I'm just going to kind of whiz through, and then I'll stop at certain bits, but just to show you kind of how you'll be able to use this. So we've got all of our contents here. So I'm just going to move the Zoom pictures away. But what you can see here is actually we don't just go straight into learning styles. We had to find something that we could talk to you about that would be really useful and interactive and such like today. So we had to choose today. But what this does is it contextualizes it as well. So you've got a bit about kind of accessibility in the UK law, but as I said, it is elements of that are really comparable. You've got the social model of disability. Accessibility starts before training, and you can see here, how information should be provided and language, how to find out delegates' needs, all of the things about using technology, assistive technology, etc. And just to kind of show you, I'll just go down to some of the useful stuff. Obviously, that tells you about us. But just to show you how kind of comprehensive and useful this will be for you. And just to take you through kind of some of those tangible elements of it as well. I am super aware that I'm kind of whizzing through this, but I'm doing it so that we can get to some stuff so that you can see kind of what's in it and you can go back to it. If you're a reflective learner, this will be brilliant for you. But also if you're a kinesthetic learner, there is a lot for you to do as well. Also, just to say, as you'll have just noticed, what we've got here as well is actually if it's face-to-face as well as if it's kind of live online as well. And the checklists there. You'll see here kind of around language. Again, top tips around finding out people's needs. We've got examples in there, different links in there. This is about what I had said about actually you can't do everything, but actually what can you do? And there's loads of examples. So I'm just going to kind of keep going to the bottom, and then I'm just going to ask Becky and Noel to give an example kind of around that accessibility element or the inclusivity element, something that you learn on the Train the Trainer or something that you use regularly. Either or would be great.
Now?
Let me just get to, let me skim really quickly to the last bit. So this is because I wanted to show the assisted technology bit. So this is about alt text. So just in case this is something that's new to you, again, the new PowerPoint does this for you. It's absolutely brilliant. When you click that assistive technology bit, that accessibility, and when it does that little check down the side, it will highlight your pictures for you, and it will generate some alt text for you and say, do you want me to insert this? Honestly, it's like it's brilliant. The new updates are absolutely fantastic. I think there's like a little bit of AI in there. And what I'd say is, again, for the presentations in particular, when these are sent to people, for some people, particularly if they've got assistive technology on their laptop or e-readers and such like, they can't see the pictures, you know, so actually the alt text is then used to describe that picture to them. And again, so just down to that, and then I just want to show you that at the end there is a huge checklist that is kind of everything together, so that you can check it off as you know, as you've gone through. So I'll stop kind of whizzing through, just because I know that you'll want to record this and it's not great just to have loads of text. But I think one of the things with these webinars is you'll say to people, you know, you can only get so much from the webinar, but we've got this brilliant resource, etc. And you only have about 15% of the people actually download the resource. And so I just wanted to make sure that kind of you were really aware of how some of those other bits that we will never be able to from there. You'll also see as well, you know, in a moment I'll put the link up to our community. You can ask us any questions in there as well. And then really purposely, oh, have I?
You're back.
You're back now.
So I don't know whether Tammy is frozen. I'm going to take that opportunity to come in and give my examples now while she sorts that out. And I guess I've got two really around accessibility and inclusivity. In terms of accessibility, I would say it is brilliant having all of these great things like Slido, Mentimeters, all of those things. But I think Tammy mentioned this earlier, having a backup is really important. And that's not just if tech goes wrong, but it's also that people can find it really stressful, suddenly having to get their phone out, do a QR code, add in different things. And so I will always say, if I'm using something like Slido or Menti, if you prefer, just put it in the chat or just come off mute and say it, because some people really find it overwhelming going online and doing it anyway, or face to face. So using those things are great, but what I sometimes see people doing is using too many of them, thinking they're the answer to everything, and actually they could be really off-putting for someone. So that would be my accessibility. And then just in terms of inclusivity, what I've really worked hard on in the last 6 months to a year is thinking about the images I use. Far too often when you do a Google search for images or find images, it gives you very, very standard images that aren't necessarily representative of a great group of people. You know, particularly if you put in young person, the chances are the first 3 pages are going to be of white young people. And I find this all the time because I'm making lots of stuff for education. So working that harder to find images that are diverse and representative, because if you think about it, if you're watching a presentation and all you're seeing are people that don't look like you, it can be really off-putting as well. So thinking about that inclusivity in terms of who you're representing in the images would be my 2 points, and I'll hand over to Noel for his.
Yeah, what I'd say, 'cause I deliver quite a lot of stuff within prisons. So what I tend to do when I'm delivering to prisoners is, when I kind of get them in the room, it's about how we can make that room different, kind of change the environment up a bit. Because normally, like when they would go on courses or they'd be on interventions and stuff within a prison environment, chairs would be set in a particular place and facilitators would kind of stand in a particular place. So even if we're creating a circle of chairs and I'm in that circle with them, it kind of just creates that unity and creates that equality with them. But also as well, just basic needs. Do you want a drink? Let them feel comfortable before we kind of get into it, because that's something, especially within a prison environment, nobody's ever offered a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. So it's just creating that sense of normality, which is also going to create growth within the session itself.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, both. Can I just check that I am back now? Because I froze, disappeared, and went flying through the world. So yeah, Fantastic. Thank you for that seamless link. I'm sure Becky or Noel or Ezra just kind of carried on. Fantastic. So we're just coming to the end of the session then. And so just to kind of, I guess, to finish off and let you know what's going to be happening next. So Arlo will be sending out the freebies from this training, and last week the pre-course information, the Zoom in and out guide about accelerated learning was sent out, and the engagement checklists. What you'll see, if you haven't kind of downloaded them yet or you haven't accessed them yet, please do, because they really connect into what we've been talking about today. But also you will get the Creating Accessible Training Guide, and you can join our community, our Transform Your Training community, for free. It's full of hundreds of facilitators that just want to deliver the very best training, and so they just support each other, give each other top tips, share resources, etc. And we share a lot of stuff in there, but there's no daft question in there, and we do regular sessions a bit like this to just help facilitators stay up to date, because we know, for instance, that Zoom had a really big update, and if our facilitators are using Zoom and people in that community are using Zoom, then we want to help them be able to kind of use the new version and things like that. So so feel free to join that and to download those things. And then next week, you have your final part of this webinar series. And it's going to be kind of just literally a bit of a free-for-all with regards to bring us your training challenges. So I have kind of spoke a little bit about Transform Your Training. You do know we've been around for about 8 years. Some of you will have been delivering training for many moons longer than that, and some of you will be really new to training. So we've got about 70 facilitators now. Everything we learn every day, we kind of inject into our Train the Trainer course. That's why it's always kind of so up to date and such like. But we definitely don't know everything, and we learn things continually. And like I've already said, there's been a couple of things that have been put in the chat today that if you want to transform your training session anytime soon, you might see just kind of appear on there. So do come along same time next week. Any questions that you've got, we'll have kind of the Q&A open, we'll have the chat open, and it's going to be questions for myself, Noel or Becky, and we'll all be kind of equally unmuted and talking to them. So if you're a bit fed up with the sound of my voice, you'll be able to hear a little bit more from them as well. So yeah, please do have a think. It can be anything related to last week's session, this week's session, or something completely random. Do you know, you might want to ask about how we use Arlo, or you might want to ask, do you know, how we deal with really difficult delegates in a session who are refusing to engage, or whatever it is. You can ask absolutely anything as long as it's to do with training. So hopefully this has been useful for you guys. Thank you for spending this hour with us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.